White has been able to join us as well. So as you're thinking about your questions and just any clarifications throughout this, we have Carolyn as a far more experienced expert, especially in the goal writing stuff, than myself. So here we are. All right, so hopefully everybody can see the screen. We had some different content planned for today, but there have been so many questions in the last week about IEPs, so individualized education plans, setting goals, kind of how do we describe a child's baseline and develop goals based on what they're currently doing, especially for all of us who are very new to aided language input, that if the focus is on what we're modeling, what do those goals look like for the child? So given just the number of questions we've had about that, I thought we would go ahead and shift some of our content around so that we could talk a lot about goals today. So what we'll be doing today is reinforcing the instructional strategy that we've been focused on in the series so far, which is aided language input, where we are all modeling a use of communication systems that our folks with Angelman can access. And on top of that, to help you think about goals and to help you kind of think about the strategies that we're using, we'll be talking about a framework that we can think of as two with alone, and I'll get more into that in a minute, and we'll talk about how to establish developmentally appropriate goals within that framework. So what we've talked about a lot already in the last 2 months is the teaching strategy of aided language input, where we recognize that kids can't begin to use a communication system if they've never seen that language being modeled by anyone else. So we're going to provide kind of a rich, immersive environment for them to see a communication system, a visual language being used. And we've talked a lot about the tools that we would use to do that. So robust core word, a communication system, and either a robust core word system, which Maureen defined really well in an earlier webinar, or a pragmatically organized vocabulary such as a pod. We looked a lot at those two things, the instruction and the tools, but less about the goals for the individual child and less about how we can assess whether the child's making progress towards those goals. And so just given the number of questions there have been about IEPs, we'll be talking about that today. This slide, for any of you who have been following the webinars, this slide will be very familiar to you. It is a model of how language develops, a visual that was created by David Koppenhaver and others. And where it's just particularly useful is showing how intertwined all the different forms of communication are, that our folks with Angelman, before they have a communication system, have primarily been developing the receptive communication skills, being able to make sense of all of these abstract auditory symbols we use, called spoken words, but they haven't had access, if they haven't had a communication system, they haven't had access to a way to actually then generate and use those words themselves expressively. And we talked last week more about the connections between being able to understand spoken language, being able to express spoken language through a visual system, like a communication system, and being able to engage with visual language in the form of reading and writing. And this slide will also be familiar to all of you in terms of we understand with typically developing students, from the time they're born, we begin speaking to them, and within a year or so, spoken language begins to emerge from them. So kids start to have their first words around their first birthday as a result of thousands of words that were modeled all across the day from the time they were born. Then we look at our folks with Angelman, where we have exposed them to so much spoken language, but for them to communicate back, we're asking them to use a completely different tool than the model that's been used around them. And so we're asking them to use some kind of aided language alternative to spoken language, and the only way we can really provide the basis for them to learn how to use that tool is if we provide that same input, that same immersive environment that their typically speaking peers had in the language that they could one day access. So this will be familiar to all of you. And I thought that that concept starts to really play into an instructional framework that I find helpful as we're thinking about how to teach our kids. So first, within the instructional framework, with everything that we learn, whether we're learning language, reading, writing, whether we're learning chores around the house, whatever it is we're learning, first we learn by observing a model of someone else doing that activity. So from the time we're born, we observe a model of people speaking around us. We become aware of spoken language. We become aware of all those different sounds of language. And we start observing all the purposes and reasons and whys people speak to each other. And then slowly, more over time, we start to actually try to participate in that, and it becomes much more of a shared experience where rather than us just receiving something, just observing, we're now trying to participate. And with communication, you see this as infants and toddlers begin to babble. They try to explore the language that they're hearing around them, and you'll hear the different sounds emerging in their babble. You'll hear them as they begin to develop that first word and start using single words. And that becomes a very shared communication experience because, if the toddler, points to something and says bird, then we share in that interaction. We say, yes, you see a bird, I see a bird too, and we expand on it, but it's a very interactive stage of communication. And then that sets the framework for kids becoming really independent communicators. Around age 4 or 5, kids are putting together whole sentences, they're telling whole stories, and now they're independently able to start engaging in communicative interactions with a whole bunch of different people. So by the time kids start school, we see this much larger kind of independent set of communication skills. Another way to think of this kind of instructional framework, the things that we do at the first stage when we're providing a model is really what are the things that I am going to do? What are the things that we as the adults are going to do? What is it that we as the teachers and the educational assistants and the parents and the other family members are going to do to provide that model? Because really those initial goals tend to be for us. What are we going to do different in order to provide an effective model for our students? Then, when we get to the with stage, now we're talking about what are we going to do with our child, with our student, while we're using that language together. So before, maybe we spoke to our child while we were reading a book. But now, when we get to the with stage, we're starting to get some expressive language from our student, and now it's how are we going to scaffold that, and how are we going to deepen that exploration in that participation. And then to eventually, our goal being to get all of our kids to be able to communicate with a range of people for a range of purposes so they can communicate whatever it is that they want to say to whoever they want to say it, whenever they want to say it. A lot of what the thinking that I'm applying to all of this comes from Dorothy Hall and Elaine Williams books, and these have been some of the most helpful for thinking about what is it that we need to do in the classroom for our kids, their building blocks model. These are based on Patricia Cunningham's 4 blocks model, but they've been very carefully redesigned to be more developmentally appropriate for those emergent kids. And so these building blocks look at the fact that many kids will come to school with a very small spoken language vocabulary. They might come to school with very little experience with books. They may have not explored books before. They may have not even been read to. Kids will come to school to start kindergarten with very diverse levels of experience, knowing what writing is and why we write and why we engage in print and that kind of thing. So these building blocks books were meant to help any kindergarten teacher be able to develop instruction for a very broad range of students. And the month by month reading, writing, and phonics for kindergarten books really start with the beginning with that whole framework of how can we create that model for kids of how we're going to use spoken language, how we're going to use reading, what reading is, what writing is. First, we're going to do the two, and then assumes that over the course of a school year, by a few months in, we're writing with children, we're reading with children, we're speaking, with children. Kids are using a much broader vocabulary as they're learning new words at school, and then we are, throughout the school year, we're now developing their independent skills around reading, writing, and communication. So a really helpful framework, but that's where I'm kind of stealing some of these ideas. And why this is so important is that 2 stage or that 4 stage where we're talking to children, we're reading to children, we're writing for them so they know what it is, that's when we're explaining the why. That's when kids are learning that communication and reading and writing, these are really important. I understand why people do them. I understand that there's some way that I could actually start to participate in it too. It makes sense to me. And you'll see this with kids. The 2 and the 4 is it's the kind of incidental learning that kids get all the time. They see us cooking in the kitchen. First they just observe it, and then we start to see them imitating cooking in their play and in their little play kitchens and that kind of thing. They see us writing, and at first they just observe it, and then they start looking for writing utensils because they want to do it too. They see us typing, and we see kids approach keyboards after they've gone through a period of observing that behavior of typing. Maybe all they've learned in the beginning is that it's important and that it matters and it's what people around them do, and then they go and approach a keyboard and try to type as well. So this 2 stage is crucial for developing kids' motivation, their understanding of the purpose of why we do stuff, and their understanding that it's enjoyable. And so it's equally crucial that we take a developmentally appropriate approach to how we're going to set out their goals, because if we miss this 2 stage, if we move straight to, for example, goals with using a communication system that are focused on the child using the system expressively rather than us modeling, then we might miss this whole phase of modeling for the child why we do it and why it's so rich and interactive. So what this looks like with communication at the 2 or 4 stage is that we're providing a model of using their communication system to communicate about a broad range of topics without any expectation or at least any demand that the child participate or perform with it. So this was something that Mary Louise covered so beautifully about 2 weeks ago when she talked about how we use the communication system to reflect what the child is doing. So Uncle Jimmy arrives and our child is excited and vocalizing and reaching for him, and we might model something like, oh, I think you want to talk to Uncle Jimmy, or you're so excited to see Uncle Jimmy, you like Uncle Jimmy. Let's show him your book, something like that. But we are reflecting. We're looking at what the child is doing, what they're already expressing with their body, and we are providing a model where we're speaking for them, essentially, using their system to show how they could communicate that same idea with their system. When kids start to get to the with stage, now they understand the purpose. Now they understand that this really matters. Now they understand that this can really enrich their lives. And so now we might see something like the child who opens up his communication system and goes straight to people and goes straight to Uncle Jimmy. And he'll say, Uncle Jimmy, Uncle Jimmy, Uncle Jimmy. And we'll say, yep, I think you like Uncle Jimmy. And now we're going to expand on that, and we're going to turn it into a real interaction, because now he's starting to use his system expressively, and we're going to expand on what he's saying to show him how much richer it can be. And eventually, we'll get to a point where the child can start to independently put together a whole message, like, let's go, Uncle Jimmy, and we can turn that into a conversation, and now he can start talking to more people. I'll just quickly describe how that also relates to reading and writing, because this all really is so integrated. So in the beginning, we're providing a model for kids so that they know why reading matters. We have a number of kids who are sitting in classrooms with IEP goals around memorizing letters, naming letters, tracing letters, that kind of thing, but they haven't yet learned why reading matters and why reading can be really personally meaningful and interactive. So in the beginning, we're providing a model for them of all the different ways we can read and how fun reading is. So we're going to read to them. We're going to read the words as we see them. Sometimes we're going to model reading the book by just retelling it as we go because it's such a familiar story. Sometimes we're just going to talk about the pictures and use their communication system to just have a conversation about the book without even reading it. But those are all the different ways that kids can observe us modeling reading and realize that this is something that they can be part of. And then as kids start touching the page and labeling or identifying things on the page, that kind of stuff, as they start being able to predict what's going to happen because these are familiar books, then now we can support the child to, for example, maybe we're going to program their system or use a step-by-step or use a Big Mac button so that they can predict repeated lines that are coming and be able to participate in the reading of those lines. We're going to show them how we can use the lines that they're hearing in the stories and the pictures so that they can predict what the next thing is that's going to happen. We're going to show them how they can use their communication system to comment on and really take part in the reading experience, and we're going to start to really start to focus on the sounds and language. And then eventually what we're getting our kids to is a place where they're interested in independently reading a range of books. They like to read, they love to read, they see how it enriches their life, and now they're ready for instruction in things like letter names, letter sounds, they're starting to learn sight words, they're starting to recognize environmental print, they're ready for some phonics instruction, they're ready for some reading comprehension. But we just have to make sure we don't skip those really important stages of providing that model of why we read. And again, why we write. We're going to provide a model of all the different writing tools that our kids can use, and we shouldn't be surprised if the first time we put them down in front of a keyboard or in front of a communication system or with a pencil, but they don't know what to do with it. They may have not seen the model. A lot of our kids with Angelman have some significant vision issues, and we might need to really be strategic about how we're going to bring these models of reading and writing right into where they can see them and understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and all the different reasons that we write, right? We write to remind ourselves for what we want to get at the grocery store. We write to share information with other people, even if it's just sending a text message about when we want someone to come to our house. We write so that we can share our stories and we can share our opinions. But there's a phase where kids just need to see us doing it so they understand what the concept of writing is. And then we will start to see this real readiness to be participating. We might do things like next week we'll look at shared writing with a predictable sentence frame such as I like. And we want to get our kids to those kids who first were just observing us using their communication systems. We want to now get them to a point where they're participating in finishing that sentence. What is it they like so that we can create books for them. In the beginning, we might just write for them a book about things that we know they like, but we're going to keep scaffolding that to them so that the more that they understand what the concept is, now they can participate in doing it with us. And maybe in the beginning, their first writing is just filling in the word at the end of the sentence like, I like. Maybe in the beginning, their first participation is just choosing who they're going to send a message to, and they're going to, whatever they generate, we're going to send, but maybe in the beginning they're just focusing on who their audience is. And then eventually getting our kids to a point where they can use their communication systems to show us what they know so that they can respond to text, so they understand the concept of writing is taking the ideas from my head and sharing them with other people, and we can do that with a communication system, we can do it with a keyboard. And then we'll start really developing our kids' kind of letter-by-letter spelling skills and the like. But we have to start with that model of writing for our kids so they understand what that is. This is just a quick graphic that I've developed around this. We'll get into this graphic more over time, and this is just kind of a first draft, but I just wanted people to really be clear on what those developmental stages are and be comfortable with that, own that. So if your child is at a stage where they're in that green zone down at the bottom, where they're really developing awareness of what communication systems are, and the idea that there's a model of language that they can participate in expressing. If they're just at that awareness stage, we can own that. And what we're going to really focus on is modeling and reflecting all the different things they're telling us during all of our ordinary interactions. So if they like shaving cream, if they like Play-Doh, we're going to interact with them the way that we always did, but we're going to model how they could use their system to say more things. But we're not going to be demanding that they use it. And then we'll get them to a stage of where they can start predicting and participating what it is that they could say in different situations. They know the words are in their systems, and they're going to start using them, and then we can start to expand on what it is that they're saying to eventually get them to a point of being able to independently communicate what they want to say. So I'm just putting this out there just to really help us think about, where is your child at? If your child is at a place where they are still very much just beginning to become aware of what a communication system is, then you're in that green zone, and the goals that we're going to write for your child, our learning goals for him or her at school, will really be focused on increasing that awareness of what AAC is, what a communication system is. And if they're starting to use it expressively, then we'll look in the kind of the blue zone for really early participatory ways that the child is going to start using their system. And if they already understand so much about the words that are in their system, then now we're going to start looking at mastery in terms of being able to communicate with a broader range of people in more context for more reasons and that sort of thing. But just think about that, because I'm going to cover now some goals that will start with awareness, because that seems to be where people are struggling the most, just given all the messages I've received as part of this communication training series. Kind of understanding what those goals look like when the goal is awareness. So we will start with that. So communication goals for awareness. Maureen has a handout that we will post in the Facebook group. But these goals, we can start with goals such as how many communication partners, a goal that our child is interacting with a larger number of communication partners modeling the use of their system. We can have goals around our child is interacting with peers versus adults versus unfamiliar partners, learning how to use their system. We can have goals around all the different locations that maybe in the very beginning, when we're all just kind of finding our feet with this, the modeling is happening in the regular classroom. But then we're going to talk about when the class leaves for social studies or science, when the class goes to lunch, when the class goes to music, when the class goes to recess. Now we can start increasing the number of contexts or settings where the modeling is taking place. Now we can have goals around the child interacting with others using their system at home versus at school or out in the community. And we can really start to look at their attention. So their attention to information that we're sharing with them when we're using their system. Are we getting cues from them that they are beginning to recognize that connection between what the symbols are for in their communication system and what we're doing? Are we starting to see, for example, that they're showing some prediction that we've been modeling for them? Oh, yes, you're telling me to stop. You know, you've sat down, you've pushed this away. You're saying you want me to stop, or you don't like this. And do we start to see that prediction where they actually look to the communication display because they understand already what it is that we're going to what we're likely to model. As we're using their systems to tell them what to expect over the day, are we kind of seeing that we just have a greater level of awareness, greater level of comprehension about all of that? Maybe fewer prompts. Maybe when we go to start modeling, we're not prompting them to try to look, because it's so hard when you're modeling to a child who won't look. It's so easy to keep prompting, and it's so hard to not prompt too much. But we can set some goals in the beginning of just simply reducing those prompts and increasing the number of times that the child looks at the display. We can look at all the different ways they're communicating, because one of the things that is really important to hold on to as we're introducing a communication system for our kids is that it's not only success if they start using the system, it's success if they start communicating more effectively. And some of our kids, through learning that they can use a communication system, actually become much more expressive in other ways. So, for example, with Maggie, she, in the beginning, one of the first words that she learned to use on her communication system was the word come. And she would sit in a corner of her classroom while she was taking a break, and she would call friends over and say, come Maisie, or come Jordan, and try to get those girls to go over to her. Well, then she learned after that she could actually just vocalize and pat the seat right next to her, and that people would understand that she meant come. So she became much more expressive, but she wasn't always using her system for it. And once she realized that she could just vocalize and pat the seat and get someone's attention and that they might come over, she actually stopped using the word come as much. But what we could see was that she was communicating that invitation to people far more often if we looked at how she was doing it multimodal rather than only seeing success if she was using her communication system. And we can set goals around the amount of social interaction our kids have. I think that's an incredibly important goal to have for our kids, is that we set goals that they will be able to interact with a larger number of people or more times with favorite people throughout the school day. So the way that these goals might look is, for example, Maggie will show increasing interest and attention to someone modeling her system throughout the day. And there's a bunch of ways that this can happen where we're looking at how we're going to measure their interest and their attention. For some kids, it's just very explicitly just looking at the symbol. Some of our kids are fascinated by what we're doing, and they obviously are watching and trying to figure it out, whereas others might be using a peripheral vision or they might be listening rather than looking. We really have to figure out what the individual child is doing. Some kids will become very still and very calm. And for example, we saw this with Maggie, where if she was upset about something, before I'd be like, I'm sorry, honey, I'm trying to figure out what you want, da-da-da, and I'm talking, and she's just becoming more distressed. And then one of the increases in interest and attention that we saw was if I took her proloquo and I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand, her whole body would calm. So I was seeing this response to my modeling that showed that my message was really getting through, and we could measure that, right? We could say how many times throughout the day, if she was indicating distress, was she actually calmed or stilled while we were modeling the system. And what I think is actually really important about this goal here, this is a goal written by Linda Burkhardt and Gail Porter, a sample goal. You can find much more detailed handout with information about aided language stimulation and a huge variety of goals. Simply Googling them, we'll put the link in the Facebook group, but we also have kind of a summary of just some of their best goals. And then there's all these different ways that we can collect more information. So we're looking for, if we go back to this goal, increasing interest and attention to someone modeling. We can look for that in the beginning. We're going to see that maybe in one context and then two and then three and then four, right? So we're going to increase the number of contexts in which we see increasing attention. We might find that in the beginning it's much easier to see increased attention in a quiet classroom, and it's only an eventual goal to be able to see that increasing attention at recess or at lunchtime when it's a much busier time of day and there's a lot more going on. We might start to see increased attention based on the number of symbols. So in the beginning, we might find that we can really only maintain some appearance that the student is attending if we're just doing that keyword modeling of modeling just a single symbol. But over time, can we maintain that? Can we increase their attention and their interest in a model as we start modeling longer and longer sentences? And can we do this without having to prompt? And then one of the most important goals to also be thinking of is that the reason that why we're communicating isn't just to share information or say a single word, but really what I think so many of our kids want is the experience of interacting with other people about what matters to them. And so we can start to develop goals around how we're going to share our personal narratives, how we're going to become storytellers. And in the very beginning, the earliest stages that our kids are kind of increasing their level of awareness around the potential of storytelling is it starts in the beginning with increasing awareness of their own stories. So attending to their own photos, attending to their own videos. We can put those into a book format. We can use apps like Pictello so that they can have talking storybooks about their own life. And do we see interest and attention in that? We have, kids who at 5 and 10 years old, this was really difficult to do. They didn't show a lot of interest, but suddenly at 15, they're showing huge interest in their own books about themselves. And once they're attending to their own photos and videos, then the next step is that they're willing to engage in joint attention with someone else. And so now we're talking about their life and all the things they do, maybe in a book format, looking at photos and videos of their life, but now they're having a social interaction with someone else. It's not just doing that on their own. Carolyn, is there anything you want to add so far just from these first awareness goals before I get to more participatory ones?
I absolutely think you are rocking the house, Erin, so let's just keep going.
All right.
All right. So here.
Okay. The next stage then is really looking at once kids have gotten past that initial stage, they've observed, they understand the purpose, and now they want a part of the action. And now this is incredibly difficult work now of they've observed this model of other people being able to communicate, but now they have to organize their own bodies to be part of it. This is going to be messy. There's going to be times when this will be extremely difficult, but hopefully we have built the motivation so that kids are so interested in this possibility that they now have the motivation it's going to take for them over the long term to develop their skills. And so once kids are starting to use a system expressively, now we can start looking at things like the total number of vocabulary words that they're using, or the number of interests that they're communicating. So maybe their very first symbol is to request something to eat, or their very first symbol with like some of our kids this summer was words like funny or stinky or silly or fart, where they found words that got a big interaction with other people. And in the beginning, that's all they did. Or maybe they found Uncle Jimmy's picture under people and they hit it over and over again. So they're expressively using it that way, but now we're going to start increasing the number of things that they're initiating that kind of conversation on, or that they're having some interaction around. We can start looking at the length of time that they're spending while doing with this, because in the beginning we might get one symbol out of a kid and 10 seconds later their attention has already shifted to something else. And so we'll start setting goals that we can maintain that interaction over a longer period of time. We'll start looking at the number of messages that they express, over the course of a day, over the course of a week. And that might mean that in the beginning, our goal is one expressive use of the communication system a month. We have kids for whom that would be completely appropriate and realistic, and that pushing them to do more than that might really not be developmentally appropriate or fair to that student. So you guys know your students, you know what they're currently doing. But just be thinking about that and be willing to look at progress that appears to be that slow. Keeping in mind that now that we're developing goals around participation for kids who have started to use their system, we're still doing everything we were doing before. We're still modeling, because the only thing consistent about our kids with Angelman is that they're inconsistent. So we're going to keep doing everything we were doing, and we shouldn't be surprised if we see, maybe we have one breakthrough this week and then nothing happens for the next 3 months. Or there was this magic moment this morning and nothing happens again until the following Thursday, right? Just know that that's what we're going to have. So we're going to have to look to capture data or have goals for messages being expressed or responses we got from our child over a large time period, it might not be realistic to get those in one session or in one day or even 1 week.
So, Erin, I'd like to jump in real fast. I think that one thing that happens is that we forget when we get to the point where the kids start using their devices a little bit, then we sort of stop and turn it over to them sometimes. But remember, this is with. We're not saying now they're on their own. We're saying it's with. Attributing meaning is absolutely crucial at this point. So this is where they hit that Uncle Jimmy, and we talk about different possibilities, model different pragmatic intents of that based on what we think they're doing. So I think it's just as important, and that's why we sometimes don't see it happening again for 3 months, is that we're waiting for it to be really clear so we can respond. It's okay to respond to something that we think might be a mishit and attribute what that might have meant, because sometimes they're just exploring and we can give that feedback on how that message might fit into this situation. So I think attributing meaning is just beyond crucial at this point.
Absolutely. So in that case, so thinking of attributing meaning, we might think of goals around initiation, that the student will act to use their system without a prompt. That goal might not be that it will be exactly what we're expecting them to say or make complete sense within the context, just that. We just have a goal that they'll initiate and that we're going to attribute meaning and build on it. We have so many kids in our community who start using the system, start using it expressively, and then they stop. And this is a story I have heard from hundreds of our kids where they were, or the team says, I know she can because she did it in the past. And chances are we got to the stage and did exactly what Carolyn just warned us about. It was we said, okay, we laid the groundwork, now it's up to you, kiddo. And we kind of left them on their own. And without that remembering that we're doing this with them and that we are scaffolding them and that we're still doing everything we were doing before, then we might be taking away the foundation that was actually allowing that child to start using it expressively. So we can look at the range of messages that the child is communicating and set goals around more messages, or more functions. So it might be that in the beginning they're only talking about specific people, or they're only requesting, and now we're going to set goals around also using it to protest or to comment, that kind of thing. And we can look at the way that they're socializing, and now really start setting goals around initiating social interaction, so that we have goals that they're not going to be passive recipients of other people coming and talking with them, but they're actually going to initiate that interaction. And that can be open-ended. It doesn't have to be initiate social interaction by going to chat words and saying hi. I mean, I think that is exactly the kind of goal I'm actually trying to warn against, right? So we need to be thinking about all the different ways that kids are initiating social interaction and not describing them or defining them so narrowly that we're putting kids in boxes and now actually discouraging them from using their system. So for example, kids with Angelin tend to be really good at greeting people. I mean, they often do it with waving hands and huge smiles and squeals and vocalizations, but they might not have a follow-through once that happens. So they can get somebody's attention and they get the high five or they get the hi, but they might not have something to do next. And yet so often I'll see in IEPs, that the child will use their talker to say, hello, how are you? Well, they kind of already did that in a multimodal way. So maybe now the next goal is to actually be able to do a follow-through and share something. We can, if we go back to Linda Burkhart's and Gail Porter's handout that is just so lovely, they've got sample goals for us, such as within natural context throughout the day, the child will use their system for a variety of communicative functions, or intents, using it expressively, and here's a whole list. So one might be to request objects, request actions, request an activity, request a turn, to reject or protest or complain, to respond or acknowledge what someone else has said to them, to share information or draw someone's attention to something, to clarify their own message, such as if something's wrong. What is it that something wrong could be, to start commenting on an action or an object, expressing their opinions, asking a question, providing an answer. And notice, I don't think it's a coincidence that Linda and Gail left answer, the communicative function of answering, as the very last one, because so often we accidentally flip that and the child starts using their system expressively, and now we set everything up, not as an interrogation, but certainly where we're expecting them to constantly answer us throughout the day. So more sample goals would be that when the student's behavior implies an interest in communicating something, that they will look toward their communication book, that they will call out. So right, we're starting to see this initiation from them, and now we're going to see that increasing range of communicative functions. Or we can say, oh, you're looking at your pod book, do you have something to say? And actually get a response to be able to build on that. It's very common that maybe our child starts to use a system and they have some one-word messages that are generating, and so immediately we jump to, now we want 2-word sentences and then we want 3-word sentences, that sort of thing, where we tend to really prioritize length of sentence as a huge goal. And Linda and Gail have kind of laid out for us a structure of how to be thinking about that. So yes, providing multi-word sentences is certainly a valid goal, but maybe in the beginning those first 2-word sentences will be something that we're going to elicit, because remember, this is the with stage. So we're doing this is communication we're having with our kids, so we're going to provide that scaffold of tell me more, or we're going to provide that, maybe the child did that exceptional greeting and squeal and got our attention, and we come over and say something, and now we're going to provide, hey, is there anything you did this weekend? Can you tell me about it? Or, where's your remnant book? Is something up? And we can see if we can start getting more information from them, but really during genuine interactions. It's not just that the child said granola bar and now we want them to add the word want granola bar before it, because those don't tend to be the things that actually motivate our kids to start putting longer sentences together. So first we're going to really be scaffolding and eliciting those longer messages, and now we might see more spontaneously produced 2-word messages. And once we're starting to get 2 symbols put together, now we're going to have to really, again, scaffold and elicit those longer messages before we're going to expect the student to spontaneously produce them. But in all of these situations, we're not saying, oh, you said granola bar, use your words, tell me I want a granola bar. Because that's just not the kind of natural communication. If you say that to a child, as soon as you say to a child, you want a granola bar, tell me, use your words, use your talker, I want a granola bar, you've just told them that you completely understand their message, but you're going to control the way that they convey it to you. And for so many of our kids with Angelman, that's not something that's going to motivate them to want to generate longer messages. I mean, so many of our kids, you will never outweight a person with Angelman. They've got more persistence and more sense of their own autonomy than just about anybody I know. You won't outweight them. So many of our kids would rather not have the granola bar than request it the way that you told them to. So, yeah.
But I think it's, Erin, it's just what you said in the awareness. Stop with the demand, down with demands, up with invitations. Okay?
Yes.
When we have it, at each of the stages, we've got to stop demanding and invite. And I think if we do that, then we're going to get that. We not only we're going to, we've seen that we do get much more success. So it's fine if they said granola bar and you say, oh, you want a granola bar? Cool, here.
Right.
But we can model the expansion, but we don't ever demand them to do it.
And Kate Ahern really talks about that expectant pause, where even at the beginning when our kids aren't using the system expressively, we can keep creating that invitation. We can keep saying that, when in the course of a natural activity such as reading, when Maggie points to something on the page of the book, you know, we will say, "Oh, Maggie, do you have something to say?" And create that expectant pause. "Let's go to your describing words." "Oh, I think you like this," or "You think that was funny," or "That was silly," or "That would be stinky," or whatever it is that we decide to say and to model. We can keep creating that invitation even before kids are expressively using it. And then really, once they start to expressively use their system, that's when it just becomes so crucial we provide that, exactly that invitation that Carolyn was talking about. So kids might show their initiation in a whole variety of ways. We might see them begin to show that initiation of using their system by simply looking towards their book or looking down at their iPad or vocalizing. Something I see in a lot of our kids is as they start to use their communication system, they actually become more vocal and can become more physical as well, more multimodal, because they've really become aware of how much they can communicate and how much communicative power they have, and they're not always going to use their communication system that way. So maybe they're going to initiate their communication first by using their voice, or first by reaching for their system, or that kind of thing. Or we'll say to them, "Oh, Maggie, you're so upset. Do you have something to say?" And we might now see the eye gaze go to the book, or go to the promo quote, that sort of thing. And so we'll start to set goals around, you know, maybe we're seeing the child using the system with their educational assistant or with their speech therapist. We're going to set goals around using it with more communication partners, maybe unfamiliar partners, maybe peers, whatever it is. We're going to set goals around the total amount of vocabulary that we see them using. We're not talking yet in this system or in this series about partner-assisted scanning, but that's just another access way for kids to be able to get access to a communication system. But here's a sample goal from Linda Burkhart and Gail Porter that really lays out choice making and how we can make effective, how we can really support our kids for effective choice making. So if they've been expressively using their system to, you know, for example, choose the granola bar from a field of 3. Remember, we're looking at our core 4 this month. Different is one of them. Here's some sample IEP goal language around selecting a choice from a field of 3, as well as the options of something else, none of these, or given our core 4, something different. And we really need to keep our focus on, as we're setting these kinds of early expressive goals for our kids, around personal narratives and storytelling again. So remember that when we were looking at awareness, it was having kids that they were interested and engaged and aware of their own photos and videos of their own experiences, and maybe engaging in joint attention with someone else around those photos and videos. Well, now we want to see, will they start initiating? So Uncle Jimmy comes over and I get out my iPad and my camera roll and I show him something in it, or I get out one of my Pictello stories or my remnant book, and now or someone comes over to greet me. I do the greeting. I do my squeal and my wave, and a favorite person from school comes over and greets me, and now I actually initiate taking my remnant book or taking a storybook or opening my system to show that I went to a birthday party this weekend, something like that. And this is also where we can start to set, where it'd be very developmentally appropriate to set goals that the child will now start participating in creating those kinds of storytelling materials. So next week we'll look at the first stage of shared writing, and we'll kind of lay out how you might write a book for your child about all the things that you know your child likes. Well, once we can start getting some of this expressive communication and this participation, now we want our children to be part of that writing process. So we're going to go from writing for them to writing with them. So maybe they'll select the photo or video, or they'll select the topic of the book we're going to write, or they're going to select who we're going to send this message to, or who we're going to write a story for. Or they'll complete a sentence such as, you know, I like, and now they'll offer that last word, or places that I like to go to. You know, I like to go to, and they'll select a place. Or maybe this is just the communication page from home. I mean, those communication pages that our school teams write for us to let us know what our student did at school today is a beautiful opportunity, where in the beginning, the aide or the teacher or the speech therapist might be modeling that purpose for writing. Today we did, and listing things that we did, and going to the child's camera roll or visual schedule to think about, what is it we did today? What should we tell your mom and dad we did? And now maybe by October, November, December, January, the child knows that. They can predict that that's what we do. At the end of every day, we write a note home to mom and dad, and now I'm going to participate by selecting a photo or using my schedule or something to be able to say what my favorite part was, or what I enjoyed, or help report back on what I did. And then we start. So after all of this, once kids have gotten through all of this whole phase of where we were speaking to them and now beginning to speak with them using their system, where they're really participating, now we're ready to start looking at goals that look more around mastery. So if you have IEP goals that kind of represent this next section, but your child isn't yet really meeting the earlier goals we just talked about at that shared stage, that with stage, then I would suggest kind of backpedaling, because I think the most common thing I see when I'm looking at our kids' IEP goals is goals that are not yet developmentally appropriate. So for example, for a child who doesn't yet know what writing is, but they're supposed to be naming letters, let's back up. We've got to back up and make sure that what we're doing is developmentally appropriate. We're not going to teach kids to name abstract shapes called letters if they don't know yet what letters are and why they matter, that kind of thing. And so we'll do the same thing when it comes to communication. So once kids, though, are using their system expressively in a range of ways, in a range of contexts, with a range of people, once they're storytelling, they're sharing their experiences, they're having those interactions, now we start to see that it's appropriate for goals such as we want to see more parts of speech represented in their expressive vocabulary. We want to see, just more grammatically correct sentences. We want to see them more independently accessing their systems and developing those independent skills to be able to use their system. We might see a greater level of independence kind of all across the school day. We might start setting goals that we're going to see less challenging behavior, because we want to see the communication system used in lieu of challenging behavior. But this is really the stage where that becomes developmentally appropriate. We're going to now set goals for the student who now is really using their system expressively in a range of ways, that we want to be increasing the number of social interactions that they're having. We want to increase the number of turns that they're taking in interaction. The number of social responses where they're the person responding, as well as the number of times that they're initiating and that they're helping to direct the conversation and direct the interaction. And that their social interactions aren't just kind of the 20 questions that are so easy to kind of get into that trap with our kids. That they're beginning to ask partner-focused questions, where they're not just sharing about themselves, but they're actually asking about the other person. And so now we see goals such as the student will appropriately ask a variety of questions using, who, what, where, and when, or that they'll intelligibly relate information or tell a story or provide instructions, that kind of thing, and start to begin to clarify their message over time. We'll see more appropriate grammar and syntax, and we'll see the student really mastering whatever it is they physically need to do to be able to use their communication system. So we've got a variety of good goals here, but these are all goals for really our most sophisticated communicators. And now we can get into really supporting them as well to be more effective storytellers. So this is similar to how we talked about the first stage of being able to share your own experiences is reviewing them yourself because you enjoy looking at them, and now sharing them with others and initiating, telling other people what you've done. And now we can get into what's called co-planned sequence social script, which Carolyn and Linda Burkhart wrote a whole book on, where we can support our folks to actually kind of pre-plan a conversation that they want to have with multiple people and set it up in a sequenced way so that it's really easy for them to participate.
And I would say that we could actually do that at the middle stage, doing those stories where students are helping us with creating those stories in their Pictello books. That would actually be a lovely thing for students who are are working with us, and now they're trying to be more independent and figuring out ways to share those stories.
And I think we have, if we haven't shared it already, we'll share a link. Jackie Mill's son Eli recently gave a presentation to an audience. He's given a number of these to different audiences, where he gave a whole presentation on himself and the different things that matter to him and the planning that's gone into his life. And he has developed these speeches essentially, at home over time with support. He's generated all these messages, but now they've been organized in a way that he can get up and actually give a speech. And they're beautiful. So we've got some videos that Jackie's been sharing that we'll post as well. And that's where you've really gone beyond the person adding a word or two or choosing the topic and adding a word or two to really being able to generate their own stories. And we'll see this with some of our kids with Angelman who have really gotten into having remnant books and personal experience books where literally they know that after going to the aquarium or going to the birthday party, they're supposed to write a book about this. You'll see this with kids where they want to add new language to their system, add new words. That becomes one of our goals, is that they will start identifying words that they don't have, or they'll start actually initiating, come on, we got to, I want to write about this. I want to write a remnant book or a personal experience story about this topic. And lastly, there's a handout that we will be posting in the Facebook group just to give you some more supports and ideas around writing AAC goal statements. It's very helpful in terms of being able to write those kind of specific and measurable SMART goals. You'll find that most of the examples are really for that middle and more sophisticated group of kids. So the handout is lovely for being able to write goals where the student is going to announce or answer or clarify or comment or describe, but it's not really written yet for students who are still at that 2 stage where they're more observing our model. But take a look at that. It's got a whole variety of ways in which here's sort of a template, almost like a sentence frame for what the goal can look like. Here are some of the words we can talk about so that we're not just saying they'll use their system, but they're going to use their system to announce or greet or name or recall or recite, and really make sure that we're making interesting goals. There's samples about how to ensure you're using really measurable criteria and that we're not getting too caught up in, that 90% accuracy over 900 trials kind of language that's so easy to get stuck with.
So Erin,
go ahead.
Erin, I would like to add a link to the AAC Language Lab because for students who are at stage 3, it's really important to see what is the developmental progression of things like when should they be doing some of those linguistic skills, so we're not setting targets that are just unreachable and feeling unsuccessful. So they've done some wonderful stuff based on Brown stages of language, and there's some lovely goals and so forth, which would be great for the students who are working more alone.
Cool. All right. So we will get that up in the Facebook group as well. So this writing AAC goal statements helps prompt you to think of all the multimodal ways that kids can be doing it, that we're not going to restrict all of their communication goals to just using their pod or just using their iPad, that we're going to be thinking about self-advocacy goals as well. So getting kids to actually start thinking about their own support needs around their communication system, such as making sure that every student has a way to ask for their device when they don't have it, or to ask to have new words added. There's language to help you think through whether we're reducing the student's reliance on prompting and whether we're reducing our amount of prompting, as well as a whole variety of different communication tasks that we can think about incorporating into the goal. So it's just a lovely handout, and you should look for that in the Facebook group. So some possible next steps, really think about what stage your student is at. And if they're at that awareness stage, then let's think about those goals around just their attention to what we're modeling, and what are the things, what are the behaviors that you see in your child when you know that they're really listening. What's the difference? Maybe it's the stillness, the eye gaze that you see in your students that tells you that they're really taking it in. Let's try to incorporate that into their IEP goals. If we're starting to see some participation, then let's make sure we're not forgetting all those things we did to build awareness, but that we're still providing just as much support, if not even more, now that they're starting to use it appropriately, or use it expressively. And let's make sure that we're really honoring all that exploration, because a huge part of that participation step, that with step, is exploring. It's not all going to be on purpose. It's not all going to be intentional. We are going to ascribe meaning, just like Carolyn said, and that needs to be part of it. We need to make sure that when kids get to a stage of where they're using their system expressively, that we're not expecting them to use it 100% correctly, but that we're really setting goals that they will explore and play and babble with it. So keep modeling the core 4. Hopefully this gave you some ideas about how to structure our goal writing around our modeling. If you've got IEP goals that you want feedback on, or you want support in writing or rewriting, share them in the Facebook group. If you've got some exemplar examples, we'd love to see them, and I think all of our other folks would as well. And we will have a webinar next week where we start looking at that shared writing, so that and modeling writing for our kids, and that will be Carolyn and myself looking at more in depth just the writing angle of all of this. And so while we wait to see if we have questions, why don't I go ahead and just thank the Angelman Syndrome Foundation for making this training series possible through a generous grant from the Foster Family Charitable Foundation in California.